We're back. We're back. Welcome to my review of Chapter 1 of One Piece. That's right, during the break, in an attempt to up the sales and get people hyped up for this final saga, Oda said the following, and I quote, "Now we only have a tiny bit of the Wano arc left. The preparations are almost done. It took me 25 years, lol. That said, it's fine if you start reading from this point on." So it looks like all this time, Oda was just secretly trying to break the Guinness World Record for the longest prologue to a story ever. So if you took Oda's words literally and you just hopped on board and you're just joining us, for a lot of us, this is chapter 1054, but for you, it's chapter 1. So again, it's my chapter 1 review. I mean, I'm obviously joking, but what's funny is that in the chapter, there's actually a flashback of Shanks thinking about stuff that actually happened in chapter 1. You get some snippets there of him partying with Luffy there in Makino's bar, and he thinks about the Lord of the Coast and how he tore his arm off. Now, Oda decides to start off this chapter with a flag, a four-colored flag, divided equally there. It's pretty nice colors. I'm not sure what the flag is supposed to represent, but it looks cool. And speaking of colors, the cover for volume 103 was released, and I like the colors and I like the lighting. The moon lighting effect is really good, but at the same time, it just kind of seems like Oda got tired. Like he started off really motivated at the bottom, but then as he worked his way up, he just got tired, so he drew a circle and a Nika and called it a day. So it's a perfect metaphor for what he ended up doing to the arc. Now, as Green Bull makes his way to the capital, he makes an observation or a reflection on Nika's power, which is the ability to sway people, which is a concept that we saw in Road to Laugh Tale, the final book, the fourth book. But in the booklet, you can clearly see that Oda decided to cross off the idea. And maybe it's because it's sort of bordering on Nika being able to manipulate people. But then again, Green Bull's mentioning the ability right here, so maybe Oda changed his mind about changing his mind. Anyway, Green Bull goes on to run into everybody's favorite characters, the Scabbards, and he reveals to us that he is in fact a Logia double fruit user. He honestly looks like a giant broccoli man. It reminds me of like those nightmare scenarios that you had when you were a kid, when you thought that your food was going to attack you. One of the things that I was very confused about initially was, why is Yamato even in this scene in the first place? Because in 1053, Yamato was busy partying with the Straw Hats. And so I thought about it a little bit more, and I think the reason is that Momonosuke has to prove himself capable of handling business in Wano, taking care of business in Wano, so that he can later tell Yamato, even though you're supposed to be the guardian of Wano, you're free to go. You can go with the Straw Hats. You can leave Wano, because I'm capable of handling things without your help. I feel like that's the reason Yamato has to be here as a witness. Because even as Momo's getting folded by Green Bull, he tells Yamato to stay out of it. That's the only narrative purpose that I can think of for Yamato being included in this scene. Now before that, Momo actually tries biting Green Bull, and Green Bull just completely brushes the bite off. And people are saying that he doesn't feel anything because Momo does not have haki, and you need haki to harm a Logia, when in fact we know that that's not true. Because if that were true, then Luffy would not have been able to beat Crocodile using his blood as a counter to his sand. So in order to hurt a Logia, you need one of two things. You either need haki or you need something that counters the element. So in this case, Momo's using his sharp teeth, on the element. So if you use something sharp on a tree, you should be able to puncture it, right? If you have a sharp saw, you can cut a tree. And we see that the Scabbards are able to cut like one of the vines, some of the roots there. And yet even after that, and after Momonosuke's bite, Green Bull just seems to brush it off. Now let's take a look at how Kaido reacted to Momonosuke's bite. Oh wow, I'm gonna have to edit this out. Now before that happens, Yamato clubs the giant broccoli man on the back of the head, and he's like, ow, that hurt. So compliments the haki. And so now I've officially noticed a pattern when it comes to Admiral fights in One Piece, and that's the fact that Oda, whenever there's an Admiral fight, Oda likes to put a little asterisk at the bottom, a parentheses, because during Marineford, the whole thing is that the Admirals couldn't really go all out against the Whitebeard pirates because they were trying to defend their home turf, right? They couldn't go crazy, because if they did, then they would destroy Marine HQ. So that's one asterisk. During Punk Hazard, we find out from Jinbei that Akainu had some compassion for Aokiji. That's why he didn't finish Aokiji off, because he felt some sympathy for his former colleague. A couple of chapters ago, Akainu was telling Green Bull as he approached Wano to not overdo it. Don't you dare make things worse, right? Like, so whatever you're gonna do, just think about what you're going to do and the repercussions it's gonna have. So that's another asterisk. And then in this chapter, there's a discussion about what happened in Marijoa. And it is said that the reason for why Sabo and the revolutionaries were able to escape is because Green Bull and Fujitora didn't want to destroy the Holy Land. So again, there's always that asterisk, there's always that parenthesis of like, oh, by the way. Which is why I really appreciate Akainu in this chapter saying like, full-blown stop. Just stop. Stop making excuses. Cut the crap. We need to step up. We need to start doing our job. So I really do hope that before the end of the series, which according to Oda's recent statement, he's trying to aim to end the series in about 3 years. I really do hope that before then we get a scenario where the admirals are just free to go wild and stop restraining their powers. And maybe that's where we get introduced to what a Logia awakening can do. And speaking of which, if it does turn out that Oda is somehow miraculously able to finish the story in 3 years, then that's further proof that Wano did not have to be as long as it was. Anyway, we find out what Green Bull's type of justice is in this chapter, which I would define as, I guess, prejudice justice. Because really what I took away from what he was saying is that discrimination is a type of justice. At least that's what I understood that he was saying. And so from that perspective, it kind of makes sense that he's an Akainu fan. Because both his type of justice and Akainu's type of justice, which is absolute justice, they seem to sort of fall under the same ideological umbrella. Now, I read 2 translations for the name of Green Bull's devil fruit. The first translation that I read called the fruit the forest fruit, and then the official translation calls it the woods fruit. Now, Oda kind of makes it a point to highlight Green Bull's reaction towards Momonosuke's devil fruit power, because he says, like, I had never seen anything like this. I never heard about a pink dragon power. And so I'm guessing that this means that once Green Bull goes back to the Marines, he's going to inform them that the experiment that Vegapunk did, this artificial devil fruit that Vegapunk said was a failure, was actually not a failure. Because if you remember, like in Onigashima, there was this discussion between the ZP0 agents saying that Vegapunk had reported that the devil fruit he created was a total failure, but Green Bull is going to inform the Marines that that's just not the case because he's actually seen a replica of Kaido's devil fruit. So Vegapunk's probably going to get arrested or accused of being a traitor for lying. Now, even though it seems that Momo is incapacitated, I wonder if he could just do what Chopper did versus Kumadori to be able to escape the vines and get free that way. Now, before we actually get to see Shanks, there's a bit of interesting dialogue here surrounding the ship. Somebody says there's a weird one mixed into the bunch. So they're obviously reading the newspaper. But what I'm not really sure of is like, who is the weird one that's mixed into the bunch? Is it Luffy or is it Buggy? Upon further inspection of the context, it definitely makes it seem as if they're talking about Buggy. So yeah, this is like sort of their reaction to Buggy being mixed in with the other Yonko. So we get a shot of Shanks' ship, and so of course he gets a memory of the last time he was in the outskirts of Wano, which was when the Roger Pirates were disbanding and they were saying goodbye to Odin. Some of the top members of Shanks' crew are pressuring Shanks to go meet Luffy now, because Luffy has now become a great pirate. Now Yasopp says that he's against the idea because he doesn't feel ready to meet Usopp, so I guess now we know who the real coward is in Usopp's family. And I always thought this was contradictory in a way, because when Usopp's mom is about to die, she tells him, go out and become a brave pirate, a brave man like your father. And I'm like, your father is a coward. He's afraid of meeting his own kid. Now, what's interesting here as well is that Lime Juice talks about Kid. In the official translation, he says, that's not named Kid is still around, right? He's got to pay for picking a fight with us. So apparently Kid losing his arm wasn't enough. Like, Lime Juice says that Kid still has a debt to pay. It kind of makes me wonder, like, what did Kid do that was so offensive? Anyway, Shanks stares at the picture of the Nika poster knowingly, and he starts reminiscing about when him and his crew intercepted Who's Who's ship to get their hands on the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Now we see that Shanks already has his scars over his eye, which means that he has already fought Blackbeard at this point. His fight with Teach already took place, and the flashback also makes it seem as if Shanks already knew even from back then, that the Gomu Gomu no Mi was special. Because Dellinger's twin brother, aka Who's Who, is very confused as to why Shanks is going into so much trouble just to be able to get a fruit that turns the user's body into rubber. We cut away from the flashback and we see some of the cabin boys, some of the, apparently like the apprentices aboard Shanks' ship discussing Luffy. And so one of them says that rumors say that Luffy is like a crazy demon monkey of sorts that's totally out of control. And so the joke here is that the one making this comment actually looks like a crazy demon monkey that's out of line. Anyway, Shanks says, no, I'm not meeting Luffy in this place, because I got a movie to promote. He kind of pins it on Bartolomeo, which is kind of funny because Bartolomeo is also in the movie, in Film Red. Because we learned in one of the cover stories that Bartolomeo was going around Shanks' territory, burning his flag and just sort of like being a total Luffy fanboy. But what's even more valuable to me about this conversation is that we knew since the end of Dressrosa that, according to the narrator, the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, which includes Bartolomeo, was actually going to cause a major incident, a great incident that would go down in history. And so to me, I think like this is the first domino falling. I think this is the beginning of that. Shanks going for Bartolomeo is going to start a massive chain reaction that will lead us to the end game.
We're in the end game now.
Because remember, Luffy tells the Grand Fleet, like, I don't want to be your boss or anything like that. But if you ever find yourself in a tricky situation, if you ever find yourself in trouble, just call us and we'll show up. So it turns out the fanboy is going to trigger everything. So it could be Oda's way of sort of thanking the fans. You know, kind of him saying that One Piece would not be what it is if it weren't for the fans. So yeah, Shanks pours himself a cup of sake, drinks it, looks over at his first mate, Ben Beckman, and says, hey, Beck, I think it's finally time to go get it, Benny. The One Piece. Now, at first I was pretty excited about this because I guess this is what Oda meant back in the end of 2020 when he said that Shanks was going to start making his move. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I remembered that the last two Yonko who stated that they were going to go get the One Piece ended up getting clowned. Something very quick, I just saw this posted on Reddit. So apparently a Japanese speaker says that the number on the bottle of sake that Shanks has is number 5 and 67. So if you go to the 5th panel of chapter 67, we get this panel of Gin telling Sanji to please let Luffy know that our paths will cross again on the Grand Line. So it's kind of like a secret hint from Oda letting us know that Shanks will meet Luffy again when they're in the Grand Line. So Wano is in the New World, but the New World is technically still the Grand Line. Does he mean like the first half of the Grand Line? Is that what this means? And if that's the case, does that mean that the One Piece is actually on the first half of the Grand Line and not in the New World? Food for thought. Now the scene with the Marines starts off with Black Horse telling Akainu that they can't ignore the Revolutionary Army anymore. And Akainu says that he understands, but there's not enough men to send over to deploy them. Which to me, that means that the Marines, at least a lot of them, are currently busy with the Shichibukai still. So that means that Mihawk and Weeble have been putting in work, keeping the Marines busy. By the way, just a quick FYI, people are already saying that Kurouma Tensei, Black Horse, resembles this Japanese actor. His name is Riki Takeuchi. And so this continues the pattern of the Marines who have code names that are an animal and a color. They're all based on famous Japanese actors. So I want to go back to this scene with Morgans that we got a while back, where he's basically talking about the 3 main stories that are about to be published. One of them is Cobra's death, which I think a lot of us predicted that he would be dead. And I think a lot of us also predicted that Sabo would be framed for his death. There was also the resolution that was passed abolishing the Shichibukai system, which we knew about a while back. But I guess the new bit of information that we get from this chapter is the assassination attempt, or at least the propaganda of there being one, which connects to Neptune wanting to beat up St. Carlos or St. Charlos, because he was trying to take Hitahoshi away and make her his slave. But then Mio's guard showed up to beat the crap out of Charlos, saving Shirahoshi and preventing Neptune from taking action. Now, the way Akainu comments on the murder of Cobra makes it seem as if this is a really good thing for the Revolutionary Army, because Alabasta was one of the 20 founding kingdoms of the world government. But what he doesn't say is that the Nefertari family is the only one out of the 20 founding families of the world government that decided not to stay and live in the Holy Land. So if anything, you would think that out of the 20 kingdoms, Alabasta would be friendly towards the revolutionaries because they sort of rebelled in some way against the world government when it was founded. So that's why the revolutionaries were shocked after reading the fake news of Sabo killing Cobra, because due to Alabasta's history, it should technically be a sympathizer, towards people that oppose the world government. Now, we had already seen that Sabo and the revolutionaries were infiltrating the territory, or the sort of like the home section of the Celestial Dragons. And so a fight broke off between them and two admirals, and we finally got a filled-in version of this panel right here. It took Oda years to fill in those silhouettes, but he finally did it. Now, if I had to use my imagination to fill in the blanks in terms of what happened, I would probably say the following. We know that Imu was aiming for Vivi, so Imu probably tried to kidnap or kill Vivi or something like that, and then Cobra got in the way, said, "No, I'm not letting you touch my daughter," to which Imu responded by killing Cobra to get to Vivi. Meanwhile, the revolutionaries led by Sabo were dealing with the admirals. They get their hands on Kuma, are able to free Kuma, and just as they're making their escape, they run into Vivi, who's running away from Imu. Sabo then decides to help Vivi out because both him and his group are getting the heck out of there anyway. So with the help of Kuma's power, they end up teleporting away and escaping Marijoa that way. Now, there are two crucial players that must have been part of this incident that are not being mentioned. The first one is Wapol, because right before Morgans was about to publish the headlines, he got a call from Wapol saying that he had some leaks. He had some spoilers to tell him about, and we are yet to know what that leaked bit of information was. So Wapol knows something. He probably saw something as this incident was occurring. And then the second person who definitely had a role to play in all of this is Bonnie, because we saw Bonnie there. Just like Sabo, she was actually able to infiltrate into the home section of the Celestial Dragons. So even though Wapol and Bonnie are not being mentioned in this chapter, I'm pretty sure they're involved in some way, shape, or form. Now, the official translation kind of makes it seem as if Cobra's murder and Vivi's disappearance happened at the same time. So it could be that maybe Imu kidnapped Vivi, and that's who the Straw Hats have to rescue during the endgame. But then again, you know, Sabo was right there. I'm sure Sabo must have had no problem helping Vivi out, especially if he actually freed Kuma. And then Bonnie could have turned Vivi into a child or something. Maybe Vivi has turned into an old lady, and that's why they're saying that she's disappeared. So Sabo has now effectively started a revolution by burning down the symbol of the Celestial Dragons in their home territory, to the point where 8 kingdoms have now been inspired to rebel against the government, which explains why the Gorosei and Green Bull keep saying that the world outside of Wano is an absolute freaking mess right now. The chapter comes to a close with Oda taking this scene from the anime, making some mild adjustments to the dialogue, and tacking it on as the end of the chapter. Regardless, though, I do think that narratively this is a step in the right direction, because it's Oda's way of sort of like trying to reintroduce some stakes and tension into the story. Now, aside from that, the final page that shows the townspeople revolting has something pretty interesting, because there's a bunch of banners there with pretty interesting symbolic implications. So the first banner is like the world government logo, but it has an arrow in the middle, so kind of like the arrow is striking the world government in opposition, right? Another banner that we get there is the Marine symbol, but it's flipped upside down, meaning that the rebellion is not just against the world government, but against the Marines as well. And so this is where Sword should come in, right? Because at the end of the day, Sword should have the people's back. It should be willing and able to support civilians in this cause, because the whole reason that Sword exists in the first place is because there were a couple of Marines that didn't like the way the system worked. We also have Sabo's flag there as well, with the S, as well as the flag for the Revolutionary Army. It has the dragon symbol there with the RA. But the one symbol that's the most intriguing to me out of all of them, the one that just kind of made me scratch my head at first, is that there are 2 banners there with the Shimotsuki logo. Now in chapter 1033, during Zoro's flashback, when he meets Kozaburo, Zoro says the following. He says, "Anyway, old man, is it true you used to be a samurai? Everybody at the dojo was saying it." And then Kozaburo says, "Well, hush up about it, or the Navy will come and invade the village." "The Navy? Why?" "None of your business, that's why. Get lost." So if it turns out that there are more Shimotsuki people outside of Wano, then this could mean that they've been hiding and waiting for the right time to rise up. Now, several months ago during a review, I talked about how Oda likes having that sun and moon dynamic, with the moon playing a supporting role to the sun, the moon supporting the sun. And so we know that the word Shimotsuki means frost moon, right? And so what if the Shimotsuki scattered throughout the globe were waiting for a sign, waiting for a symbol, the sun, to make his move? And so now with Sabo being dubbed the Flame Emperor, maybe they're sort of interpreting that as him being the fire god of sorts. And so now they've decided to come out of hiding to pledge their support for the upcoming war. Now recently in another video I talked about how nothing really came out of the statement that Frankie made in Zou about creating a weapon that would destroy Kaido. But even then I said that it could still technically have some truth to it, because now that we know that Pluton is in Wano, if Kaido fell into the volcano and the volcano is somehow connected to Pluton, and if that's what ended up destroying Kaido, then we know that Frankie has seen the blueprints for Pluton, and he could technically rebuild that ancient weapon if he wanted to. So if that's the case, then he could technically rebuild an ancient weapon that, in a sense, ended up destroying Kaido. Now, this statement from Zoro that he also made in Zou about gathering the samurai of Wano and leading them also never really came true. Unless, going into the final saga, it's Zoro's job to gather the samurai of Wano, the Shimotsuki clan that are scattered throughout, recruit them, and then lead them into battle as the rightful heir of the Shimotsuki clan. So if Oda does that, he can kill two birds with one stone that way. Because not only will we end up learning more about Zoro's heritage, but he'll also fulfill his promise about gathering the samurai. Finally, I appreciate the official translation's clarification on a statement made by, I think it's Kizaru who says this. He says, at this point in time, Sabo is so popular that he might have more influence than Dragon. So he doesn't say that Sabo is stronger than Dragon. He doesn't say that Sabo is more powerful than Dragon. He says that Sabo has more influence in the world right now than Dragon does, which makes sense because Dragon has historically made an effort to keep a low profile. He kind of works from the shadows, all that stuff. That's kind of how the Revolutionary Army has operated up until this point. So that makes perfect sense, and I completely agree. Again, I do think that Oda is sort of using Sabo as a catalyst, as a way for people to think that he is Nika, that he is the next, the reincarnation of the sun god, maybe. And so a lot of people are going to start supporting him, but eventually, because this is One Piece and it's about Luffy, Luffy will be the one to sort of prove that he's the real Joy Boy, that he's the real sun god, or the reincarnation of Nika, whatever you want to call it. But for now, Sabo's stealing the spotlight. This chapter feels like it's symbolizing the beginning of the end, because we have the Grand Fleet about to be involved, with Shanks going over to Bartolomeo, and that causing a great incident, the major incident that was foreshadowed since Dressrosa. The Shimotsuki banner being there by the end really made that point hit home for me, because it's like Oda, you can feel Oda pulling all these different threads, which is what he said he was going to do in his statement before the break. That's what he said that he was going to do. He was going to try and pull these different threads together so that he could begin tying things up. So yeah, this chapter definitely feels like it was intentionally conceived. It was intentionally thought out to be a chapter that gets the engines running, gets the engines going at a much faster pace than we're used to. One Piece celebrated its 25th anniversary during this week, and so some film red spoilers are already out online. I think I read somewhere that the voice actor for Zoro actually teased that Zoro's bounty post Wano was in fact going to be higher than Sanji's bounty, which we kind of knew that was the case. But yeah, I do remember that was something that was sort of said during the weekend. A lot of it was film red related though, or promotional stuff. In terms of like stuff that relates to the actual story and the manga, there wasn't a whole lot of that revealed during the weekend. Because I did pay attention to all of it, because I wanted to include it in this video. I'm still not sure when the One Piece anime will be back. I tried to catch the latest episode last night, but they were showing Battle of Gods instead. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and thank you for all of your support on my previous videos and on this video. I really appreciate everything you do for me. If you would like to, you could follow me on Instagram at Team7Mage. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching again. Take care. Have a great week. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.